All right.
All
Hello,
right. Hello.
everyone, and welcome to the EDI Catalyst, where we're going to explore topics of equity, diversity, inclusion, and indigeneity in STEM. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Albright, and I'm excited to share with you this new initiative spearheaded by the Carbon to Metal Coating Institute here at Queen's University. At C2MCI, we're committed to advancing EDII in STEM fields by fostering a culture of respect, inclusion, and excellence among our researchers, students, and partners. In this podcast, we feature special guests from diverse backgrounds and perspectives discussing their lived experiences, as well as provide some resources and tips on how to create more inclusive and equitable environments. Through this, we hope to inspire you to become a catalyst for change in your own communities and workplaces. So, a few notes before we get started. There's always time at the end of the session for members of our live audience to ask questions, so please remain muted until then. Or you can also put any comments or questions in the chat and we'll check that at the end as well. Also, another big announcement today. I'm also excited to introduce Sarah Chima, who's a graduate student here at Queen's University in the Crudding Group, who's going to be joining me from time to time as a co-host on the podcast. So welcome, Sarah, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi, thanks for the introduction. I'm really excited to be a part of this. But the theme for today's talk is actually celebration of Pride Month. And I'm really honored and excited to have Dr. Lana Hebert, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Chemistry at York University, join us today. Welcome, Lana. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure.
That's fabulous. So to start, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey to your current position or role?
So I grew up in a very small town in Newfoundland, so fair ways away from where we are here in Ontario. And once I was ready to go to university after high school, I, of course, did like most Newfoundlanders do, and I went to MUN. And far be it from being a sort of second choice or second rate, I found in the years since that that experience did give me a very good chemistry education. And then from there, my path became a bit more circuitous. I had some struggles with my mental health after my bachelor's, and so that led to taking some time off from graduate studies, and I actually dropped out of a PhD program at MUN at the time. And then after some time away, my love for chemistry kind of took over again. And I came to Ontario where I did a master's and a PhD at Wilfrid Laurier. And I actually just convocated there or convoked yesterday or 2 days ago. And so it's the end of a long journey and it hasn't been easy. And I guess at the end of it, I am proud of what I've accomplished. But it certainly hasn't been a straight, clear route to where I am now.
Great, thank you. So my first question for you is, I'm also from Newfoundland, and you come from a really small town in Newfoundland. How did you really cope and handle some of the negativity towards being queer within religious communities as they're really hardcore with their views?
And so I did grow up in one of those very hardcore fundamentalist evangelical environments. And so, I mean, the spectrum of what I grew up and the ideas that I grew up around were everything from dinosaurs were planted there by the devil to, all queer people are causing the destruction of society, right? I remember that being preached from the pulpit back a number of probably 15 years ago or more. And so that no doubt was a large contributor to that just terrible mental health after my bachelor's. It was one thing to have accepting friends and a good environment where I was in town in St. John's. But going back home or being around my family or my old friends, it was very, very difficult. And actually, when I came out, I think it was in probably the third year of my bachelor's, I remember being told that, you're going to hell and, God have mercy on your soul by people that I grew up with, people that I consider friends. And that's hard for anyone to go through, let alone someone who feels so isolated. Um, and so getting past that has certainly taken quite a bit of effort. But if you're out there and you're just coming out, or you're struggling with your family or your old friends, I would say that at the end of the day, you can't change anybody else. They have to have that will and desire themselves. And all you can do is protect yourself. So if it is too much, you don't have to be around anyone. Well, I say that, but there are all sorts of circumstances. And the other thing I would say is give them time. Lots of people will surprise you in the end. And just hold out hope, I guess, unless it becomes too hard to do so.
That's really great. Wonderful.
Thanks for sharing. Can I just jump in there for a second, Sarah, too? Thanks for sharing that with us, Lana. Can you give maybe a little bit of insight onto things that you did or that people did to help you overcome those more challenging times?
I would say that having it's hard to say because there have been many times where I felt very, very alone, but that was perhaps more so my inclination to withdraw. And so there have always been very, very special and supportive people around me. And so allowing yourself to be around people, allowing other people to comfort you, to support you, that's something that you have to give into, right? If that's what you want in the end. And so giving space to people who aren't fully there yet, that's also an important part of this, because there will be people who will be beautifully supportive and also hurtful. And so that's something that I think having grace for people where they are, in the same way that perhaps they think they are for you, right? They feel that they're giving you grace by being nice to you or treating you the same as they always did. And in the same way, you got to realize that a lot of people do come from these small communities or from these sheltered backgrounds. And it's not so much that they, deep in their hearts hate you. It's that they don't know much different, or they haven't been exposed. And so being that person to show them that, hey, people like me are fairly normal. Well, I'm crazy, but other people are normal. Um, it's a burden, but it's also a blessing, because once they come around, it's really, really beautiful most of the time.
That's really great. So maybe building on that too, I think you mentioned too, at least when Sarah and I talked, that when you made the move to Wilfrid Laurier University, you received a lot of good support there. Can you talk a little more about that and what some of the examples of how you felt more supported there? And maybe building on that after is some suggestions of what you think we can do in our institute and universities to help support students who are in the queer community.
It's funny because I was at the convocation there 2 days ago, and I swear to God, the lovely lady fitting the attire misgendered me, I think, twice. But it's otherwise she was so wonderful that it's hard to really hold any ill will, because it was such a great interaction otherwise. And people, for better or worse, get uncomfortable sometimes when they're exposed to things they're not used to. When I went to Laurier, we have this kind of trope in the trans community where you transition and you cut off everybody and you run and you never go back. And that's sort of what I did. I basically came up here with a very small suitcase. I brought almost none of my old clothes, and once I got here, I threw it all out. And then I went to a thrift store and I bought all new clothes. I completely, from that moment, went by a different name, uh, the one I have now. And what surprised me when I got up here and started interacting with the department and my supervisors and so on, was that very few people, in fact, I honestly can't think of a single professor or, administrative assistant or anyone who misgendered me, whether in email or what have you, which is really surprising because I didn't actually change my name legally for about 3 years. So, in your university systems, it typically goes by that name that you were assigned. And back then, there wasn't really that idea of, well, this is my preferred name, so use this in official communications. And so I was always very, very impressed with how my professors or colleagues now, I guess, treated me. It takes effort to do that. I didn't come up here and magically look different or act different. Uh, so it did take effort on their part to get it right. And I will always appreciate that. It was one of I would say it still is, one of the places where I feel the most safe, I would say, in that environment. And so I'm very thankful to those beautiful people for doing that for me, for providing a place. It's unfortunate that I had to go 3,000 kilometers away from home to find that. My home life with my parents, home life, I don't live with them. But my relationship with my parents is much improved from that point. But Laurier was really like a second family. Louise Daw was one of my co-supervisors, and she's pretty much like a second mother in the way that she looked out for me when I first came here. And so some people might criticize how I did things in that, you might say I didn't tell my parents. We didn't have an actual conversation about my transitioning for about 3 years after I did it. And that probably speaks to my avoidance issues. But at the end of the day, you have to do what works for you. And so I guess you could say all's well that ends well. But there's no one size fits all solution. It's going to be uh, what's best for you. And so if that is going as far away as you can get from home and not having to run into anybody that you have to see, then you should do that. And if you're able to, come out either as queer or as trans with your family and friends around, well, that's even a bonus. And if that doesn't happen, maybe you'll reconnect at some point. And there will always be found family. And I think that's a really important thing in academia and in life in general.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think the name thing is amazing because being in this role that I'm in now and seeing more of the administrative side, oftentimes emails are set up with your, given name. So I can see how that would be very hard, especially if someone didn't tell me ahead of time, then I wouldn't necessarily know that someone's going by a different name. So I think there is work that needs to be done at that kind of university level, that if people are now going by a different name, even though it's not officially changed, we should have things in place so that people can do that.
And I think part of that as well is you're right. There should be systems in place. And today it is different than it
Mm,
was 8 years ago.
yep.
But back then what was really vital was the advocacy and sort of guardianship of those people around me. So my
Mm,
supervisors or various professors and staff in the department, that they kind of took a leading role in that. I never once had to say no, like you have to call me this, to most people, at least within that sphere of our department. And so they were instrumental in making that happen, because otherwise it's what is it? It's the burden of the minority, right? It's
mm.
us always having to correct people or to lay claim to our identity. Uh, it's very it's helpful when other people take on some of that burden as well.
Mm. Can I build on that too, about pronouns, for example? How do you find, so you mentioned people often say your correct name. How do you find people are with using pronouns?
People, it's interesting that you say that. I've never really thought about it, but with names, I mean, people go with what you tell them.
Yeah.
With pronouns, people do feel quite a bit more liberal with coming up with what they think is best.
Mm.
And I gotta say, I would say that academia on the whole is quite okay in my experience on that front. Um, I will say that there are those related topics, like people will get my name and pronouns correct, but then, you know, bathroom stuff somehow
Mm.
perennially comes up. When I mean, think about it, when was the last time that you asked somebody, where do you go to the bathroom? It's not that common of a topic, but for trans people, it just happens to come up. Uh, I was with a lady there 2 days ago, uh, telling me where the bathroom was. She's like, "Oh well, well, the men's is down there and the women's is there," uh, which is good. Give people all their options. Um, uh, I'm kind of conflicted on this topic because part of me wants to say, well, you shouldn't assume anything about someone's gender or their pronouns, and then the other part of me says, well, my name is Lana. Damn it! Like, look at me. I have purple hair. I'm a girl. Um, so I'm not quite sure where if I want them to assume and get it right by my books, or to be more cautious and not. I think at the end of the day, um, any assumption that you make runs the risk of you being wrong. Um, and I would like to caution the cis normies out there, um, that unless you unless you make a point of treating all of the presumably cis people the same as the trans people, then you run into the problem of separating out those trans individuals in your attempts to be accommodating or helpful, right? So, I mean, there's very few groups that I'm in where people share their pronouns, and I would say that if I were in a group and say that didn't happen uh, most of the time, but then when I join, it does, then you start to feel othered. So I think it is a fine line between being welcoming and supportive and being, I kind of call it patronizing, um, simply because it's not something that would be done unless you assume that there is a trans person present,
Mm.
um, which it kind of goes against the idea of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, interesting. Um, so I'll just kind of take over from here. um, so I think before we kind of switch to more kind of audience type questions, maybe I'll just ask this one. So what does Pride really mean to you, and the celebration of Pride Month as a whole? What does it represent and mean for you?
Um, so as I said, I grew up in a very, very small town, and I grew up very conservatively evangelical in religion. And that leads often to, especially for someone like myself, to a lot of guilt and a lot of shame, a lot of fire and brimstone, I'm going to burn in hell. And that leaves, I think, for the rest of one's life, an indelible mark. And part of Pride Month is trying to reclaim some of the pride from that ingrained shame, uh, from that guilt. And it's difficult. I think now, after however many years, it's far easier than it was initially. Um, I mean, nowadays I go anywhere with my mom. She gives me her old clothes. Um, it's a very different relationship than what we had, but it took a lot of work to get there. Um, and so, I mean, celebrating Pride to me is celebrating the fact that my mother loves me enough to to come around to that. Um, it's I had another thought there, but I lost it. But yeah, pride is pride is being myself in spite of everything else. I remember when I got this job, one of my dear colleagues who I love asked me if students ever gave me crap for being trans. And maybe women get that question, maybe other minorities get that question, but that it was kind of startling to me that that's one of the things that I would be asked at such a time was, how would you handle someone uh, not liking you because of who you were? Um, and so, yeah, being celebrating Pride to me is overcoming that idea that there is anything for me to have to apologize for or be ashamed of.
I think you're
Oh,
muted, Sarah.
I said that's wonderful. God. Um, so before we switch to viewer questions, what are kind of the final message or key takeaways you would really like to leave our listeners with?
the first is that especially the students that I see these days, they are laser focused on their goal. Great, good for them. But I think they feel that if their path to wherever they're going isn't a straight line of least distance, that they have failed beyond belief. And that is not true. Yes, your life will be different than if it were a straight line from here to success or what you think is success. But there is room for all sorts of calamities in life. And so take them as they come and deal with them as best you can and lean upon the people who are around you to get you through them. And then if you are out there and maybe you're just coming out, maybe you're considering it, maybe you did it years ago and things just still haven't improved. That's a possibility. Um, but I would say just, I guess, keep holding out hope. Um, you can't change who you are. And so the world's just going to have to change for you. And so if that doesn't happen right away, then keep holding out hope that it will. Um, and you can always change your own world. You can leave those situations behind if need be.
That's great. Um, so if anybody in the audience has any questions for Lana, I'm sure she'd be happy to give now. You can either write it in the chat directly to me or in general, and then I can read it out, or you can speak up now.
Yeah, maybe while we give people a chance to think of your questions, you can use the raise your hand function as well so we can see who's wants to ask a question or comment. It doesn't have to be a question, it can just be any comments. I just wanted to comment too, Lana, on your takeaway. I think in the beginning when you were saying about giving people grace, I think that's a really good takeaway too, giving grace for yourself, but also giving that grace to other people as well, that we're all learning and growing as people. So I think that's another really important one that I think really stuck to me in our discussion today. So
Yeah, there's there I've had a lot of really mediocre experiences, and they're often uncomfortable, and you don't want to go through them.
mm,
But at the end of the day, uh, most most biases, most prejudice, that doesn't go away in a vacuum, right? If
yep,
you never have to interact with somebody who you don't like, you're probably never going to like them.
mm,
And as uncomfortable as it is, often somebody has to be the first. And
yep,
the more that we are open, the faster things will change.
mm. Great. So any questions from the audience? Sarah, did you have any other follow-up questions that you
I
wanted
do.
to ask?
Yeah, definitely. Um, so because this is a EDI type podcast and you most recently went through the hiring process, what changes do you think could be done to make the hiring process more inclusive?
Um, I think that uh, the main thing that stood out to me after my interview here was how physically grueling it was. There was tons of walking. It started very early in the morning. It ended fairly late in the afternoon or at the end of the workday. And there was no unscheduled minute in that entire day, whether it was lunch or meetings or what have you. And after that day, I had the thought, well, like if I was severely or more severely disabled than I am, physically or um, you know, fatigue, etc., I would have not been able to do that. If I had mobility issues, I wouldn't have been able to do that. It's an incredible amount of going around, of walking, of having to ask people to use the bathroom. And that's what really stuck with me was uh, how inaccessible uh, the interview process was. This job isn't a physical job, right? My teaching work is not particularly demanding in a physical way. Um, Yet that interview was testing in some ways your ability to keep up with that, right? And I remember when I was doing my undergrad, there was something of an idea of, well, if you can't hack it, then you don't belong here. And I think that still kind of seeps into the way that we do a lot of these things. I mean, if you even the CSC, right? We start super early and then everybody drinks until midnight, and it's hard to keep up with those types of, I call it like macho. Oh, I'm so sorry for my fault. Um, just that type of go go go. And so I know that when we interviewed somebody recently here, there were bathroom breaks built in. It was a much more forgiving schedule for people who need to use the bathroom, for example, or have other issues that might prevent them from, say, walking uh, kilometers in the run of a day. Um, and so I think that those are important considerations. Obviously, you can't prepare for every eventuality. But I mean, there are certain things that are common sense, and then there are other things that, it never hurts to ask what people need. Um, and I think that's the most important thing, is being attentive and being aware that not everybody is like yourself. And so there are some people that, whether you understand it or not, they're going to need certain things in order to, uh, I don't want to say be at your level, but to perform as you would. They need a different set of circumstances. That doesn't make them any worse at that. It's just the way it is. I think it was, I don't know if it was Einstein gets a bunch of quotes always attributed to him, but I think it was, if you ask a fish to climb a tree, you're going to be disappointed because that's not what it does, right? And so I think that applies to a lot of people as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to point out. I know me, even after having like two meetings in a row, I need like a mental break just to even digest what was just told. So I can't imagine going a full day back to back, being kind of like mentally stimulated and turned on for that long. That'd be exhausting for anybody, let alone somebody who has extra disabilities or things like that.
Yeah, it's. I don't think I've had a day here quite like that one. Uh, but I guess that was maybe the point.
I think too, since COVID and the switch to a lot of things being online, people find that as well, that now people will book meetings just back to back without a second thought, when really, if those were in person, you would have to budget in time to walk to those places, or I think it's easier to think about. So I do think that is a prominent issue that people are being more aware of now as well. So Sarah, I think that looks like we're close to our end of time. Do you want to ask our final fun question?
Sure. What is your favorite chemical element slash molecule and why?
I would say water, and I know that's
Water.
probably a boring answer, but I was on Reddit and I saw how on Mars apparently there's this volcano that has water or ice on it. First time it's ever been seen, and how water is the entire reason, pretty much, why we can exist on this Earth as the way we do. And so I'm pretty well most days. Most days I'm grateful for water and existing.
I think that's a great molecule. You know, everyone we ask this question to, they tell us their element or molecule, and they're like, this is probably boring or it's not very cool. And I'm always like, no, it is cool. And when you hear someone's explanation, I think it makes even more sense. So
I think it's probably because we I don't know, we're exposing a bit of ourselves and we're trying to hedge our
mm.
bets that you don't think we're too dorky.
Very true.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
So yeah, I think that brings us
Alrighty.
to our end of time.
Well,
Thank
thank you
you.
for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Lana, and thank you, Sarah, for co-hosting with me today. And we'll see everyone next month. We're going to be doing the episode is on allyship, so kind of following up to this one. So we hope to see you all next month. Bye.
Hey, everyone.
Um, Before you two go.